Lecture 19. Those who have never made significant mistakes are merely mediocre individuals, Part 2. 3. Psychological barriers to fear of failure. I previously discussed two psychological barriers, loss aversion and self-enhancement. In addition to these innate psychological obstacles, we also face social barriers that need to be overcome in order to change our attitude towards failure. Social barriers are not inherent in us, but rather developed by society after we are born. There are two main social barriers that I want to address. The first is that schools do not encourage failure. You may recall that in Lecture 16, I spent an entire lecture discussing the 3 harms of school education on leadership. Now you can see that the harms of school education on leadership go far beyond just 3. Not encouraging failure is also a significant harm of school education on leadership. I would like to quote German psychologist Gerd Gigerenzer: teachers do not encourage students to find their own ways to solve math problems to avoid mistakes. Teachers tell students what the answer is and then test whether they can remember and apply the formula. Schools emphasize learning for exams, minimizing mistakes, but this is not the way to cultivate great people. Gigerenzer is talking about the situation in Germany, but it seems that school education around the world is similar. Students cultivated in schools are afraid of making mistakes and afraid of failure. What happens to these students when they enter the workforce? Most of you work in organizations, and you will find that organizational systems are another major social barrier outside of school education. Leaders like Ren Zhengfei are rare. The vast majority of organizations reward success and punish failure. For the impediment of fearing failure in one's ability. I have just discussed psychological and societal obstacles, and now I will talk about the third aspect of obstacles, which is the obstacle of ability. I want to remind you that the reason why great people have a different attitude towards failure is not mainly because they have overcome psychological and societal obstacles, but because they have overcome the obstacle of ability. I have just talked about two psychological obstacles, loss aversion and self-enhancement bias, which are ingrained in our genes and difficult to overcome. The two societal obstacles I mentioned earlier, school education and organizational systems, are deeply rooted in the social system and also difficult to overcome. Only the obstacle of ability is more likely to be overcome through personal efforts. Before discussing the obstacle of ability in detail, I want to talk about Kahneman's theory of two systems. You may already know this theory, so let's quickly review it. Kahneman divides our brain into two systems, one called System 1 and the other called System 2. Both systems are involved in thinking and decision-making. System 1 is the fast system, an automatic system. System 2 is the slow system, a deliberate system. Why did he call System 1, not the slow or automatic system? Because when we count, the default order is 1, 2, 3, 4, starting with 1, then 2. Kahneman wanted to emphasize that System 1 is the brain's default system. Anything goes through System 1 first, and if System 1 cannot handle it, System 2 will participate. Do you remember when I talked about the theme of telling stories, I mentioned emotional and rational systems? The emotional system belongs to System 1, and the rational system belongs to System 2. The obstacles to changing our attitude towards failure that we encounter are closely related to these two systems. I will mainly talk about two obstacles to ability. The first is the hot stove effect in management. The hot stove effect was named by two management scholars and is a quote from the famous American writer Mark Twain. Mark Twain said that a cat that has been burned by a hot stove will not sit on a hot stove again, but it will not sit on a cold stove either. This actually means, once bitten, twice shy. Why does this happen? Because only System 1 is involved in learning, and System 1 thinks it has learned a lesson, but it hasn't. Faced with failure, we often only involve System 1 in learning, which makes us only see the surface and overestimate failure. The hot stove effect is the first obstacle to ability, which means that only System 1 is often involved in learning. However, even if System 2 is involved, we will encounter the second obstacle to ability, which is the lack of methods. Our brain is good at fearing failure, but now we need to learn to embrace failure, and System 2 doesn't know what to do. What should we do if we lack methods? I will help you find methods in the next 2 lectures.